One of the most annoying things in Kubernetes is the complexity of installing applications. When you start to work with it and you install a bunch of them, you quickly get to a point where it just becomes a mess to control everything in manifests. But don't worry, in this video I show you an easy way of installing and managing even complex setups and applications in Kubernetes by using Helm. We will install a few example applications like Nginx and WordPress, but I will also show you how to find new applications you can install and how to customize and manage them. But before we do that, let me say a few words about today's sponsor of this video, Teleport, which is an open source access proxy to manage your server environment securely. You can use it to protect your Kubernetes cluster, your Linux servers, your web applications or databases with two-factor authentication and an audit logging by using their free community edition, completely self-hosted and no cost. And suppose you want to use Teleport within your company environment and secure your development or operation teams. In that case, Teleport also offers an enterprise version with additional 24/7 support and single sign-on. It's a great application, so just download and try it out. You will find a link to their website in the description of this video. So back to Helm. What exactly is it now and how does it work? Well, the easiest way to describe Helm is to be a package manager. Think of it like an apt or yum command for Kubernetes. And you can use it to install applications on it, manage and update them, and of course also remove them. I know that's a very simplified explanation, but of course it still describes it very well. And using a package manager on Kubernetes is extremely useful because let's assume you just want to install an application on your Kubernetes cluster, like a MySQL database, for example. Then you need to create several objects in Kubernetes to make this work. So you first of all need a deployment or stateful set that defines your pods and containers. Then you need a persistent volume to store all the data, a secret containing the credentials, a config map to store the database configuration files, and a service object that defines how the pods can access your application inside and outside of the cluster. And that's really just the bare minimum. For more complex installations of databases like replication or scaling, you might need even more objects and other config files. And creating and managing all these objects can become quite hard, especially when you define them all in manifest files. And here Helm tries to take away the burden from us because it defines all these Kubernetes resources the application needs in one single template. These templates are called charts in Helm, and you can find them for various applications and deployments. And it really is easy as it sounds. You just pick a Helm chart that you want to use, for example a MySQL chart, and when you install the chart on your Kubernetes cluster, Helm will create all the necessary Kubernetes resources that are defined in the chart, like the deployment, the service object, the volumes, the config map, secrets, and so on. And this makes it extremely easy to deploy even complex setups of applications that need many of these Kubernetes resources. So whenever I want to deploy an application on my cluster, I always look if there is a Helm chart already existing instead of writing all these manifests myself. So that sounds pretty awesome, but let me get this out of the way. Helm is not a replacement for Kubernetes manifests or CLI tools like the kubectl, because even when it's creating all these objects for you, you still need to understand what these objects are and how they work. So it's still important to have a good understanding of managing Kubernetes resources and objects even without Helm. And that's why this video is part of my Kubernetes tutorial series. You can watch it here on YouTube entirely for free, by the way. But Helm should be definitely in your Kubernetes toolset. So let me walk you through some of the basic commands you need to know. Let's go. Okay, so if you want to use Helm to install applications onto your Kubernetes cluster, you actually just need two things here. So first of all, you will need to download the Helm Package Manager and install it on your local workstation. So just go to the official homepage helm.sh and navigate to Get Started Installing Helm. So this will teach you how to download and install the binaries, or how you can use package managers like Homebrew for macOS, Chocolatey for Windows, or apt or snap for Debian, Ubuntu and other Linux distributions. And the second thing you will need is you will need a kubectl that is configured to work with your Kubernetes cluster. And you should also take care that you're using the correct namespace, because Helm will use the exact same configuration settings like the kubectl command. So for example, if you have a kubectl command that is now connected to your Kubernetes cluster and your namespace, the Helm command will just use the same configuration settings. If you're following my tutorials, you often see that I'm using an alias command for kubectl, and I also created another alias for Helm that is called H, but that will just use the Helm command. So it's actually just doing the same thing, it's just speeding up my workflow. So when you install the Helm application, you can just use the Helm command to see what you can do with this package manager. There are all the different commands that are available, but don't worry, I will walk you through all of this. So first of all, if we now want to install a Helm chart on our Kubernetes cluster and we want to install an application, we should just check that we add some repositories where there are some charts defined. So for example, you can find them on the official Helm documentation when you just go to charts, and this will take you to the Artifact Hub page where you can find, install, and publish Kubernetes packages. So you can search for packages, you can search for publishers or repositories. It's similar, organized like the Docker Hub. So for example, if you just enter MySQL, you will just see all the different charts which match this keyword here. They are all maintained by different publishers in different repositories. And one of the most popular repositories, I would say, is the Bitnami repository. So Bitnami is made by VMware, and they are maintaining a lot of different applications and Kubernetes charts here. And then you can simply just go to the Artifact Hub and just go to the Bitnami repository and see all the different charts you can use and get all the details about them. So let's try to do something useful. Let's first of all connect to my Kubernetes cluster and let's try to install an Nginx web server. So one of the most common things I usually just demonstrate here in my tutorials. And it's very simple. First of all, you will need to add a repository that deploys an Nginx web server. So first of all, we need to add the Bitnami repository to be able to deploy those charts. And you can actually do this by executing the Helm command and then execute the command repo add, and then you will need to give it a name like Bitnami and then use the URL of the chart. So let's just go to the Artifact Hub and let's just copy the URL of the Bitnami repository. Let's paste it and hit enter. You can see that's already existing in my configuration. So if you want to check what are the different repositories you have currently installed, you can just execute a Helm repo ls, and that will list all the different repositories you have currently added. You can also search inside these repositories. So for example, if you want to search for an Nginx server, you can also use the command helm search, and then it gives you two options to search. First, you can search in the hub, so this will just search in the entire Artifact Hub without using the website or the repo, and this will search in the repositories you have added in your local configuration for a specific keyword. For example, let's just search for the Nginx chart in my repositories that I've added, and you can see there is a Bitnami Nginx chart that we can use to deploy it on our Kubernetes cluster. So let's just do that. Once you have added your repository, it's very simple to install an application. You just enter helm install, then give it a project name, for example, web server, and then use the Bitnami repository. So first of all, name the repository Bitnami / and then the chart you want to install. So let's just hit enter. And you'll see this is now using the kubectl configuration connecting to my cluster, and you can see it's now being deployed. You can see it can take some time while the Kubernetes resources are created in the background. And if you want to see what's actually happening on your Kubernetes cluster, let's just use the kubectl command to query all the resources in the current namespace. And you can see there are a bunch of different objects that Helm has installed here. For example, it has installed two pods here with the web server Nginx. It has installed a service object, so we can access our pods from outside the cluster. And it's also installing a daemon set, a deployment, and a replica set. And if we now want to access our web server on Kubernetes, we simply can just copy this external IP address and open a new tab, and yeah, let's try to open it. And you can see this is now being deployed, so that's very, very simple. So now if you want to check which Helm charts you have currently installed on your Kubernetes cluster, you also can query them. So you can also enter helm ls, and this will list all the charts that you have currently installed in the current namespace you're using. So you can also set a different namespace here with namespace default, for example, and this will give you a different output here. And you can see I've not deployed any Helm charts in the default namespace. So it's very important if you execute the helm ls command and you're not seeing your Helm charts that you check if you are in the correct namespace. And you can see we've just deployed one Helm chart in the Helm test namespace, and there's also a revision number. We will talk about this in a second, and what is the status here and which chart is is it using in which app version. So you can see it's pretty straightforward to install applications with Helm. Most Helm charts come with decent default configuration files and settings, which will work in most cases. But still, of course, you usually want to customize some of these values or default settings when you deploy those applications in production. And here Helm gives us the ability to override some of the values which are defined in the chart. So what exactly you can change and how these values are used within the chart itself, that depends on how the creator of the chart has defined them. So that means you should not try to edit these Kubernetes objects or manifests manually once Helm has installed them. But you can change most of the variables in the chart with a value file. You can even change some of these values after the deployment of the chart by updating it. However, there are some limitations. I will show you that in a second. So it's better to define all the desired values for the variables before deploying the chart and later just update if it's needed or if you want to install any updates. And Helm uses a pretty great system to manage existing installations on Kubernetes because it always keeps track of the changes. So when you want to install a new Helm chart on your Kubernetes cluster, it starts with version 1. And when you update this chart, Helm increases this version counter. If anything fails, you can always revert back all the changes to an older version number. In Helm, these are called releases, and it's very crucial to understand that to be able to manage the installed charts on your Kubernetes cluster. So let's take a look at some other charts like a WordPress chart and try to override some of the default values. Okay, so if you want to customize some values inside these deployments, you should know which values you want to change. So to check that, you can just look up the charts in the artifact hub. So for example, if we want to customize some of the values from our Nginx chart, you can just click on that to get some detailed information, and then you will find a README file with some instructions how to use this chart, how to install it, how to uninstall it, and so on. And you will also find some resources here. So first of all, you will find all the templates of the manifests this Helm chart is using. So when you click on that, you can inspect everything that the Helm chart is doing. So for example, when you go to the deployment.yaml, you will find a deployment object here with all the different values and parameters it will deploy. And you can see there are some placeholders for these values. This is because there's always a default value that is deployed by Helm. So to change or override those values, you will need to create another YAML file which will define those variables. And this will then override the default values. So you can also check what are the different values you can customize here by click on that default values, and this will give you usually a long list of all the things you can customize here with some documentation and some README files to see how you can use it. For example, let's try to deploy something different. For example, I want to deploy a WordPress blog on my page. Of course, I want to customize some of the things like the username, the WordPress blog name, maybe the email address the administrator account is using, and a bunch of other things maybe. So let's go and check out a WordPress chart. I've not selected the correct one, so let's go with the Bitnami repository. And then we want to inspect the default values file here. And you can see there are a bunch of default values I want to change here, for example, the block name. But first of all, let's just copy this one here and open it in VS Code, because then it's a bit easier for me to see. So for example, let's search for blog, and you can see there are a bunch of different values that are defined for the WordPress username, for the WordPress password, the email address, the first name, and also the blog name. And you can change anything in here. So let's create another file, which is called WordPress values.yaml. And then we want to customize some of these values. You don't need to use this file here. You simply can just override what you want to change. So for example, we just want to override the WordPress username here. We want to override the password, of course. And we also want to override the WordPress blog name here. So let's change that. Give it a password like test1234, just to test something, and we will change the username, and let's name this to Christian's blog. So this sounds pretty great. So now we want to deploy the Helm chart with these specific values. So let's go back to the terminal. and you can see the file is now in my current folder here. So I can now execute the command helm install. And we now want to install the project WordPress by using the Bitnami repository and the WordPress chart. And now we want to inject some values here and refer to our WordPress values.yaml file inside my current folder. So let's hit enter now. So you can see that our WordPress website is now being deployed, and this can take some time because WordPress is sometimes really slow. But we can just query the status by just query the Kubernetes objects and see if our deployments are already running. So let's just query it by using the kubectl commands get all. So let's check what is currently deployed. You can see the load balancer and the service object and also the database are already up and running here. But the containers are still pending here. So that might take some time here. Okay, so now everything should be up and running, so let's just try to access our blog. And you can see there is our WordPress blog. Christian's blog is now up and running. That's great. Let's also test if we can log in with our defined password. And this is also working. Awesome, right? Okay, so now I also want to tell you how you can make some updates or changes to your blog, because maybe there is a new version of the Helm charts that's being released, or you want to upgrade or change anything inside the values here. You can also do that. But as I said, there is some limitation to that. So you can't always customize every value after the deployment. Some values are forbidden to change afterwards. Some are just not working. For example, if you might want to change the value for the WordPress blog name, so for example, let's change this to XZ blog, for example, and you might want to do an update. Now, you could assume that this would now change the WordPress blog name, but that's not the case, because some of these values are just used for the initial deployment, and also some other values are forbidden to change afterwards. So in case of that value here, this wouldn't have any effect, but there are some values that you can change. For example, if you have some values that are quota requests, for example, let's also check in the default values some of the resource requests here, for example, some memory requests, and we might want to customize that because 512 megabytes is not enough. We need more memory for our WordPress blog. So let's copy this part here of the default values. And let's just remove all the unnecessary things we don't want to customize. But for example, let's change the 512 to 4 GB. And let's save these values. And now we can upgrade our Helm chart to add or change those values here. So let's execute a Helm ls command again so you can see what is currently installed. You can see the WordPress Helm chart is now installed in the Helm test with the version number or the revision 1. And now we want to upgrade our Helm charts by using the command helm upgrade, and then we want to use our project WordPress. And we always need to enter all the values that we've used in the initial deployment again. So let's enter Bitnami WordPress, and we also want to enter the values inside our WordPress YAML file. So let's hit enter. And now you can see that has done some changes. So first of all, we have changed the revision number from 1 to 2. And if we take a look inside the Kubernetes objects, for example, let's just inspect the deployment WordPress here. You can see if we scroll down that our resource requests have changed from 512 megabytes to 4 GB. And this is how you can easily use those values files to customize certain aspects of your Helm chart deployments, and how you can upgrade them and use revisions. And let me also explain what will happen if you made a change that broke anything and you may want to roll back to a previous revision number. So you can first of all check all the changes that have been done inside the Helm charts by executing the Helm history, and then use the project name like WordPress, and this will give you a list of all the changes you've done. And then you can see there are 2 version numbers because we've upgraded our Helm chart, but maybe we did something wrong and we want to roll back to revision 1. So just execute the command helm rollback, and then use the project name and the revision or the version number you want to roll back to. So we want to revert back to version 1. So what happened now is we reverted all the changes we've done in revision 2 and did a roll back to the revision 1. But you now would assume this would have the revision number 1 again. So this is not the case. You can always see that even if you do a rollback, it will create a new revision number, but it has reverted back the changes. So for example, if we now check our deployment and scroll down to resources, you can see that we now have the memory 512 megabytes again, like it was in the revision 1. So I hope that gave you a good overview of the Helm Package Manager for Kubernetes, and it's a great solution to simplify the installation of applications. It's also worth mentioning that you can create your own Helm charts and repositories. So I haven't really done this before because most of the applications that I needed to install, there were already Helm charts existing for, and when I needed something very specific, I just deployed it with regular manifest files. But maybe that would be a topic that interests you, so please let me know in the comments if you have used Helm before to create your own charts, or if you would want to see a video about this. In the following videos, by the way, we will also use Helm to deploy some other applications in my Kubernetes cluster. For example, we will deploy Teleport or Portainer to manage your Kubernetes clusters and expose it with ingress controllers. So I hope you will enjoy that, and thanks everybody for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.